As I noted last week, when I read these texts, I read them differently than I did just a month or two ago, right? And this is the text that April read for us from Micah 6, is number 3 in my top 10 of passages that I consider essential for my understanding of the Christian faith. And it's so clear. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God? But what does that mean in the midst of a pandemic, to do justice? What does it mean to love kindness when we can't even leave our homes? Well, Micah also lived in a time of crisis. Assyria was threatening the nation, led by their king, Tiglath-Pileser, better known to his family and friends as TP for short. So you can say they had a TP crisis, we have a TP crisis, only theirs was too much, ours was too little, right? But Michael's oracle is presented as a lawsuit against the nation that's brought by the prosecuting attorney. In effect, I mean, they even had such back then, courtrooms and lawyers and lawsuits. So I invite you to turn to your own Bible. Now, I left my preaching Bible back in my office, so I had to find a Bible here at home. And this Bible was the one that my father gave me when I went to college, my freshman year. So, Dad, this is for you. And it's, it's seen better days, but it's been through some good times. So we read from chapter 6 of Micah. It begins, "Hear what the Lord says. Arise, plead your case before the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Hear, you mountains, the controversy of the Lord, and you enduring foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a controversy with his people." So it's, you see, the prosecuting attorney calling for the witnesses, the very hills that are called to the witness stand in this case against the people. And then he goes on to list all the saving acts of God from the Exodus on to the entry into the promised land, and then asks these rhetorical questions. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Now that's imaginable, because in those days they used to do that, right? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Well, let's just up the ante a little bit. Everyone's got to sacrifice a little bit more. It seems a little extreme, but maybe it's doable. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Wow. So folks back then could not have read something like that or heard something like that without thinking of that first Passover, when the firstborn of the Egyptians were taken. And that, just suggesting that, would raise that question. Wait, are you saying, Micah, that we have become like Egypt, right? That we have now become the oppressors? Think how often that happens in history, when those liberated become the oppressors. I used to read this text and think, well, how could that ever be possible, right? That we would ever think of anything like that. We wouldn't sacrifice our children. Grandparents? Well, if you're following the news, the lieutenant governor of Texas made that suggestion. Now, in all fairness to him, he was speaking for him of his generation. He's 69, not that much older than me, but saying, that we in our generation ought to be willing to go out there and basically risk our own lives to get the economy going for the sake of our children. That prompted the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, to retort, my mother is not expendable. Your mother is not expendable. And I hope we would all feel that way. No one should be expendable in this time. By the way, if you are stuck at home and a little bit bored looking for things to do, Google Andrew and Chris Cuomo, Chris being Andrew's younger brother, who is a commentator on CNN, and they have this absolutely delightful interview that's very serious on the one hand, but then they get into this wonderful banter between two brothers that's just a lot of fun. Who did mom love best, and who was better at basketball? So just a lot of fun to watch, even as it makes us stop and think. Well, after asking these rhetorical questions, the prophet then becomes quite serious and asks, what does the Lord require of us? Walking humbly with God. Now, I hope you are walking like Judy and I have been doing this week. We've had more long walks this week than we have had in a long time. And it's just been delightful the way we have started engaging with our neighbors. We were on a loop going this way, and a neighbor of ours was on a loop going that way, and we crossed paths twice on our walk. And so that's one of the good things that is coming out of this. But Micah speaks of walking humbly with God. And I think this virus is teaching all of us a lesson, right? I mean, we are supposed to be the most powerful nation on the earth, and yet have been brought to our knees by something we cannot even see. Last fall, when I was considering my retirement from the church and thinking about a date for it, Dick Busey gave me some great advice. He says, go out with a bang, right? Not with a whimper. So I thought, well, you know, I started on Easter. Easter would be a great Sunday to end on. This Sunday actually marks the end of 29 years of my ministry. And so starting 30 next week, and Easter will be my 30th Easter in the church. You know, full church, big celebration. Yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Even though the president has suggested that Easter would be a great time for us all to come out, come and, you know, go to church, fill up the churches. I don't think that's a very good idea. If you read the morning paper, I really recommend Michael Gerson's column on just that topic. Doesn't seem right to be celebrating resurrection when we are risking the lives, especially of the elderly in our midst. And so learning a lesson of humility, right? This is not going to be over by Easter. It's probably not going to be over by Mother's Day. Some of the restrictions may be lifted in time, but as I suggested last week, I have proposed that we consider that Sunday when we are all able to come out of our tombs, so to speak, to share together, to unite together as a church, that will be our Easter. Maybe May, it may be June, it might be July, or even August. I don't know when, but regardless of whenever it is, it will be a great celebration. And still, my last Sunday with you will be in just 2 weeks on April 12th. I cannot tell you how sorry I am that I picked this date now. You know, back then it seemed like a great idea. But just when I get to feeling sorry for myself, I see pictures of those loved ones separated by glass, unable to touch one another, to say even goodbye. I see those hallways filled with gurneys and sick people lined up in the hospitals. So yeah, it's a real bummer that we don't get the kind of closure that we would like to have in this time. But think of it this way. You won't have to listen to my corny jokes anymore, and I won't have to put up with your pretend insults. They are pretend, right? But, you know, there are so many more important things happening or not happening right now that we need to be concerned about. And besides, I would gladly give up my last Sunday for the chance to watch Sabrina Ionescu and her teammates in the women's basketball team in the national championship game. Oh my gosh, my heart breaks for those women and the men too, and so many more who have been deprived of so much in this time. But you see, life is not fair. The world is not just. So what does that tell us about God? If we need to think in these times, how is God present in a time like this? And so to help us understand where God is and what God is doing, I turn to that great theologian of Hollywood, Mel Brooks. Young Frankenstein, that movie from Mel Brooks from over 40 years ago. And I think of one particular scene of that movie. Gene Wilder's character, the young Frankenstein, or young Frankenstein, I think is how he pronounces it, has just inherited this castle. And so he goes to claim his inheritance, and he is greeted by Igor, his servant, who goes to help him with his bags. and then let's watch what happens next.
Let's go.
Allow me, master.
Oh, thanks very much.
Walk this way. This way.
So Igor goes to to Gene Wilder's character and tells him to walk this way. And I love the subtle humor, though, when he goes to reach to get the larger bag and instead decides to take the smaller one. But then he leads him and he says, walk this way. But no, walk this way, as he hands him his cane, and Gene Wilder starts to walk that way, right? So that's what it's about. Not just showing us where to walk, but showing us how to walk. And how is that? Like the way of a servant, Igor. Like the way of Jesus. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday, when we talk about that entry of Jesus on a donkey, a very humble animal. A very direct and intentional parody of Pilate entering on his powerful war horse. So let's think about this virus and what it reveals to us then about God's presence in our world. Loving kindness. I have a group of friends that gather to make a toast every Thursday in a local restaurant to someone in the news in a reverse kind of fashion, not toasting to celebrate them, but toasting them for something really bad they have said or done, and then a reverse toast to someone who's done something really good. All right, so it's backwards. But there are a number of people, retired folk, professional folk, a number of politicians, ex-politicians, also retired. Even Congressman DeFazio shows up now and then when he's in town. It's a great group that comes together for fellowship and inspiration. And this last week we got together, as we always do, by Zoom from each of our homes. And in the course of the conversation, someone brought up our server, a young woman who recently gave birth, her first child just a few months ago, and who has now been laid off work, like so many in that industry. And this group has decided to take up a collection to see how they can help her in this time of need. I think of our own members, a member of our church who learned that they had been exposed to COVID-19 and experiencing symptoms. Don't know if it is or not, but already people are organizing to say, what can we do to support that household in this time of need? Another member who was laid up from surgery, isolated. When I called him, he said he'd received over 52 cards, mostly from people in the church thinking about him. I think of the things that our elders are now organizing to do, to figure out how we can be in touch with everyone in the church, just to check in, to make sure that they are doing okay. Loving kindness. So I encourage you to do the same, to think about the ways that you can connect with others in your life, friends and family and church members. Doing justice, though, is even harder, because doing justice requires so much that is physical, right? As we talked about last week, when Jesus said, I was hungry and you fed me, I was naked and you clothed me, I was sick and you visited me, and even in prison. I mean, how do we do justice in a time like this? Our Sunday breakfast decided to close down because we didn't want to risk spreading the virus among people who are very vulnerable. Now they're reorganizing, and I'm pleased to announce that today they are passing out 250 meals. 50 of those going to Whitebird, 200 going to the dining room, sack lunches. First time the dining room, as far as I know, has ever served on a Sunday. That's happening because of what we are now calling the Downtown Food Hub, the new shelter that's opened up on the fairgrounds. That's even asked if they can help them with preparing meals. The governor issued a clarification of her orders on Friday, specifically appealing to groups like us, saying, please do not cut back on those very essential services to vulnerable people. I talked to the public information officer for Lane County yesterday, and he told me that Lane County is very concerned because the public health officials are making us very aware when you are hungry, when you have not been fed, you're not getting good nutrition, and if you are not getting sleep, because particularly you are on the street, your immune system goes down, and now you're even at more risk. And so they really see this as a public health crisis and are calling upon the whole community to respond so that we can protect the health, not just of those individuals who don't have the same resources we do, but in so doing, protecting the health of our entire community, because our health is tied to their health. So this is a critical time for us, and as we seek to do justice in concrete ways and to figure out how to do that. Our president, Amy Metzger, has appointed a COVID rapid response team to do just that, to figure out how we can do these kinds of things in a way that is safe for our volunteers, for our staff, and especially for those that we serve, to protect the health of everyone, including our entire community. Photojournalist and Methodist missionary Paul Jeffrey was the guest speaker for our Week of Compassion back in 2005. He had just returned from documenting that tsunami on Christmas Eve in 2004, and asked this question of how do we think about God's role in the world after a disaster like that literally wiped out 200,000 people, carrying them, many of them, out to the sea. And Jeffrey told us, if you take the crucifixion seriously, you have to understand where God is in such a disaster. God's not on some high place safe somewhere. God is there, present in the rubble, with the people who are suffering. God is with those who are trapped, even with those who have been carried out to sea. You see, our God transcends disaster, fights for the health of all people. It's not the commander who issues orders and demands for the rest of us, but rather even the voice of dissent that says there must be another way, like the prophet Micah. The volunteers serving meals to those who are most vulnerable to infection. The doctors and nurses caring for their patients even when they don't have the proper equipment to look after the health of every person. See, God is there, giving hope in the midst of fear, spreading love through acts of kindness. So may we all, especially in this time, follow that one, to catch up with that one who says to us, come, walk this way.